good afternoon, and I'm glad to see you here. I hope you're going to find this class interesting. I'm going to try to do it in as interactive a way as possible because that's how actually I enjoy it the most, and it's always more fun to get questions from you. So if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me. I guess the key thing to remember, please, about when I show you a whole bunch of stuff with Plone is that don't feel like you need to memorize it, obviously, hopefully, but just remember that it's doable. Whatever I'm going to show you is doable, and then you can refer back to the slides, or you can email me or contact me, find me in the Slack. I'd be happy to help you. So the key thing is just don't worry. I'm going to be probably moving a little bit fast. There's a lot of stories I have to tell too, as some of you may know. I talk a lot. So, all right, so let me start my screen share, and I'll probably just share my entire desktop. And that will be a little easier for everyone. So how many of you have been able to create or already had an AWS account? For those of you who haven't created or don't have an AWS account, were you planning to just watch, or did you want to follow along? Because it's kind of fun to have a Plone site of your own, and this is about as easy as setting up a Plone site as you can get on a real server. There are a lot of ways to set up Plone, and what I wanted to do is just give you an easy way to just have one running on a real server, as opposed to trying to run the unified installer on your computer, or to try to run Docker or Vagrant, there's a lot of ways of setting up Plone. Okay, well, I guess really welcome to this talk that is actually, whose title is a bit of a lie, because what you're going to find is you can actually set up a Plone site a heck of a lot faster, an intranet with Plone a heck of a lot faster than even half a day. It's actually kind of the case that Plone itself, once you start to get to know the features of Plone, that you start to realize that it kind of has the makings of an intranet almost out of the box. And it becomes probably clearer as you get to know the features of Plone, as you start working with it. You'll find that really you can just turn on a couple of things and it's essentially have an intranet ready to go. So a little bit about me. I've been at 6 Feet Up now for 1.5 years, but before that, I've worked with Plone for, hard to believe, 16.5 years now. And I've worked at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for 12 of those years. And then I worked at Wildcard for a bit. I did some consulting work. So it's all been with Plone. And in a way, the way I got involved with Plone is I just put up my hand because my director at the time at the university had a project, a grant, and he said, is any developer interested in taking a look at this grant? And I said, okay, because I was the new guy. And it turned out to be to create a website for non-technical people, for educators in the state of Wisconsin, Arkansas, and Delaware, who needed to be able to log into a site and retrieve documents that were not publicly visible. And that could be just general information on a web page, or it could be files, Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, things like that. And so I did some research and discovered Plone. And at the time, Microsoft SharePoint had been released, just been released, version 1. And at the time also, I'd been kind of burned in the battles of the 1990s, and so I really didn't trust anything Microsoft. So basically, Plone and Zope and CMF became the go-to recommendation. And that's how I got involved with Plone. So that it became clear that Plone, for that one project for educators, was so useful that the university where I was working needed to get on board with Plone. And so we started rolling out sites, and we had, in the end, a small team of us built about 350 sites using Plone for the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. And some of you know, like Hillary, for example, has been here in Oshkosh. So I'm in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And as you can tell from my background, he's been here because we organized a Plone Symposium, the Plone Symposium Midwest. But I also, as you can tell from my little blurb here, I've gotten really embedded in the Plone community, and it's been great. So it's really changed my life and my career for the better. Raphael, hey, and Jean. Okay, so the little story really is that I stumbled on Plone, and it turned out that it was actually for a project that wasn't just a website. It turned out to actually be a kind of intranet. So it had a mix of public information and private information. And so that's when I just got keyed in on all the features of Plone that provide that kind of security, that login protection. And so that's been in the back of my head. So one of the things I did on campus is I led the intranet project. And that was a long-running project where we wanted to turn a lot of paper processes at the university into online processes. And as some of you know, some of those processes, many of those processes turned into what I'll refer to today as workflow applications. So that's a combination of Plone content and a custom workflow. And so we'll get into that in a little bit more detail for those of you who don't know Plone that well. And we rolled that out. And so in a lot of cases, university departments and programs were able to replace paper processes where people would pick up the phone and go, hey, have you seen my expense report? And someone else says, yeah, hold on. And they pick up another phone and call someone and say, have you seen an orange envelope on your desk anywhere in your office? And so all of that was replaced by electronic workflow apps built with Plone as part of the campus intranet. So what are some of the things that make an intranet an intranet? So our use case at the university wasn't unique. There are a lot of governments, huge governments, the entire federal government of Brazil, state governments of Brazil, local and regional governments in Belgium, lots of universities use Plone as intranets, and a lot of corporations. So it's one of those, what we refer to in the Plone community is one of these huge silent use cases, because we never hear about them unless one of the Plone service providers is working on it and happens to mention it. So as you can imagine, most people who use an intranet just set one up and start using it, and they don't talk to the community. They don't really want to advertise their intranet, because the whole point is to make their content private. But we know that Plone is in wide use this particular way. And so for those of you who do have already Plone or Plone-based system like Castle CMS at your institutions, you probably are aware of all these features. But really, what is an intranet? It's something that's document-centric. That can mean pages, it can mean files, it can mean forms, form data. And what you really want is to enable collaboration between individuals and teams. So when you talk about teams and individuals, you need to authenticate. So clearly you've got to have a central authentication system, or at least if you're not using it across say a campus or a corporation, you at least want to secure the kind of access to particular parts of your intranet. And so that's access management. So you want to be able to say this part of the intranet is accessible to this team, but not to this other team. When you talk about intranets, you're talking about trying to find lots of information that's been added by different teams to it. And so that means search is huge. As many of you know, Plone's got a very capable built-in search. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then some of the things that make an intranet really useful to someone is, and that is really a key aspect of running an intranet, is to keep driving your users to it, because it's often the case that when you create a website, and many of you have seen this already, you create a website because somebody said, I need this website for whatever, like a university department or some team within a corporation, and you hurry off and you implement the thing and then you build it, and then they never log in to update the content again. And there is nothing more frustrating for a developer or an integrator to work so hard and put so much time and energy into something and just not have it be used. So a key aspect of intranets is also driving interest in your users to keep coming back. So you have to make it useful to them. So you have to add functionality that they are going to be able to customize, and they're going to be able to tweak and move things around and bookmark stuff. And so that's a key part of intranets, the self-service configurability of whatever it is that you want to present them with. So I wish I had a show of hands how many people don't know Plone yet. Anybody don't know Plone? Okay, great. Oh, come on, Hillary. Jeez. Yeah, all right, you don't know Plone. So Plone's been around since 2001, and it's a very stable, it's a long-running system that's been around the block quite a while. In a lot of ways, it kind of hurts Plone to have been around the block for a while, because often at, say, PyCons, we get approached like, Plone, geez, you guys are still around. Well, you know, there's a reason why we're still around. It's powerful and it's stable. And yes, it's not maybe the shiniest, newest thing on the block anymore, but there are a lot of good things about it. And on Friday, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the features of Plone security in particular that highlight the fact that stability is actually a big plus. But yeah, Plone's been around for a while, and it's used by a lot of large organizations. A lot fewer, I guess, hobbyists. People who want to run blogs now tend to just jump over to WordPress. Okay, that's too bad, but Plone itself is strong, stable, really good in terms of scaling, as many of you know. So what are some of the other things about Plone that are coming up? Well, Plone 6, as some of you may have heard, is going to be Plone as what we call the classic user interface for Plone, which you'll see and play with today. But it will also have a React front end. And by React, that's the JavaScript framework that I think, is it Facebook that created it? I'm trying to remember now. I think so. And so it's going to have a pretty fast, very interactive response to anything you click through on your browser, in your browser, or on your mobile device, but it'll still be talking to Plone in the back end through an API. So you'll still have the stability, the security of Plone, but you'll have a really sharp, very modern front end. And the other advantage to Plone's going over to Volto is that a lot of developers who are very knowledgeable about using JavaScript tools and the technology around JavaScript tooling will be able to just kind of jump over and start developing for a Plone site. Just happens to have React as the front end. So the familiarity and just the wide knowledge of React tools is going to make Plone 6 open up to a wider audience again. So it'll be that shiny, but also the stability of Plone in background. So today, we're hopefully, as many of you as possible, will be able to set up a Plone site. We're going to turn it into an intranet, and there's a couple of ways to do that. We're going to create some users and groups, and we're going to start granting access in different ways to a couple of parts of the Plone site. And then we're going to demonstrate along the way what it means for that portion of the site to be protected differently using Plone security mechanisms, and how that affects the different kinds of users and their roles on your site. And then we're going to look at, we're going to talk a little bit about search and workflow applications. And then we're going to play with the dashboard. That's a feature of Plone that I guess, unfortunately, isn't widely used. It's not talked about a lot, but it's one of those little hidden features that I think is very useful to a Plone user, a content editor who has a lot of work to do in reviewing content for a site that they're responsible for. And I know, Raphael, for example, he and his teammate Eric have had to manage content and review content for publication before anything gets public. And that's a terrible responsibility. But it's nice to have information at your fingertips, and that's what a dashboard does. Any questions so far? So some of you hopefully have had a chance to create an Amazon account, AWS account. So I'm just going to show you. So once you've created it, and by the way, the instructions for doing that are at this link. And I'm just going to bring this over here. The portion that you're going to want is once you've logged in using your new AWS account, then you'll hopefully get presented with a management console. And then you're going to want to create a new Amazon EC2 Elastic Compute Cloud instance. And that's just a virtual machine, a server that you're going to create using an Amazon machine image. So yeah, can I have a thumbs up on who's got an AWS account and has started looking through that? Okay, great. Thank you. And the rest of you, it'd be great if you turned on your cameras. I promise I won't yell at you. And you can make fun of me, please. Okay, you're not taking me up on it. You can take me up on it anytime you like, it's okay. So I'm gonna flip over to another browser, and I'm actually going to run through these instructions myself. So an Amazon machine image is really a disk, a copy of the disk with all the configuration in it of a server that I was setting up earlier that had all the software included and some add-ons. So we'll take a look at some of the add-ons that I included in the installation because they're useful. And I made a copy of that as an Amazon machine image. So the way I got to this was if I was at the dashboard, I can click on instances here in the left column, or I can go to services and click EC2. Okay, same thing. I'll click on instances. And I'm going to click launch instance. So here you're going to want to search for an instance by name, and let me just get the name here. Oh, the key thing here too to check is that you're in the North Virginia region, US East 1, because that's where I put the machine image. Unfortunately, Amazon AWS doesn't replicate machine images across all regions, although that's probably a wise thing given how many regions they now have. And so you're going to want to look for the AMI by this name. So I'm going to search for it. And there's, in my case, well, hopefully you'll see this, one result in community AMIs. So click on that. And why is it not showing up? I've got a JavaScript error. Maybe it's Firefox here. Let me click on AMIs here. Okay, so once I finish searching and I click on AMIs in the left column, then the AMI I wanted shows up here, and I can click select to start. So I'm going to click this blue select button. So this is an interesting choice. For those of you who want to use the free tier, go ahead and leave the box checked for T2 micro. The T2 types are general purpose computing instances. And so I'll just go with that. And down in the bottom, you want to click next to configure the instance details. So please just turn on your microphone, holler if you need help or yeah, wave or something. I think there's a reaction button here in Zoom for waving. So I'm going to click next. On this instance details page, you just want, in my case, I need to scroll down a little bit because I want to make sure that this T2, T3 unlimited is not checked. It's basically going to burst and cost you money. So you don't want that. It might be useful though, if you're running a real system, a real production system, you might need that. So I'm just making sure that this is not checked. And then everything else you can leave the default settings. So I'm going to click next for add storage. And here again, there isn't anything to change. It's going to be a 20 gigabyte volume. And I'm going to click next to add tags. Tags are really ways for you to add information, metadata, so you can find your instances later. Some really large applications deploy so many servers that humans lose track, and so the tags are used to allow searching by other programs to manage different kinds of stacks of servers. So in this case, we don't need to add a tag, so I'll just leave that and then go next to configure security group. You can see how hard this is. And then in this security group, you can leave this as create new security group, that's fine. And as you can see, the first type of firewall opening, this is what a security group does. It lets you control what the firewall allows in to your server. You do want to allow SSH just generally. And at some point, if you were running this in production, you would want to change this so you can limit it to a particular network or to a particular IP address. So that's one of the choices. I could limit it to my current IP from this machine I'm logged into the console with. But I'm going to leave this open. And then you're going to want to add a rule. And you can leave it as custom TCP. And in the port range, just turn on 8080. And this, for those of you who know Plone, this will be familiar because this is, hey, Robert. Nice speech. That's great. I wish I had an office there. You want to turn on port 8080 because that's the port that the Plone container, the ZOP, is actually going to be listening in on. So with those two rules, click review and launch. And really, this is just a little warning that, yeah, you've left your rules open to any IP address. That's what the 0000 means. But that's okay. This is just a test. And go ahead and press launch. Yes. So you can do this key pair. Really is what's going to set SSH keys for you to log into the machine if you need to. It's usually a good idea to make sure that you can still log into your server. And so in my case, I have an existing key pair, but you can go ahead and create a new key pair. And this just means it's going to generate a private key and a public key, and then download it to you can download it to your machine as a .pem file. So I'm going to call it PWC 2020 and then download the key pair. So I'm going to save my file locally. And for the purposes of what we're doing today, we won't need this key pair. Now you can launch the instance. So this will take probably about 5 minutes to run. So while that's running, I'm going to click on this. The following instances have been initiated. I'm going to click on this link to see it. And so I'm taken back to the instance dashboard. And you can see it's still pending. The state of the instance is pending and it's still initializing. So everything's good. Does anybody have any questions so far? Everything okay? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit, while that's running, let's talk a little bit more about what we're going to do with this machine. As soon as the machine comes up, and you can see, sorry, I'm gonna keep moving this around because it's nice to see faces. If you've got your box checked for your new instance, then down here, you will see an IPv4 public IP address. So if you put your mouse over this little icon to the right of it, you can copy it to your clipboard. And then I'm going to open up a new browser tab and go to that IP address, paste it, and then I'm going to say colon 8080. And I'm going to hit enter. Ah, it's already running. Cool. There you go. We're done. There's your intranet. All right. So that's kind of how easy it is. In fact, if you like, I'll leave this Amazon machine image up, and you're free to use it as much as you need. I'll have some details. Actually, there's details in my how to set up training guide on how I set it up, what installer I used, how I configured the installer. In fact, there's a copy of the build out configuration file in there. So if you need to refer to it, it's easy to find. So we have this, has everybody got their site running? Is it running yet? Okay, good. So what you're looking at really is the Zope container. It's the Plone view of the Zope container. You can run as many Plone sites as you want inside this container. And you can get yourself into a heck of a lot of trouble when you do that. At the university in Wisconsin-Oshkosh here, when we started deploying Plone, we started off with one site, the campus front page, the main site in the container. But over time, we started getting requests from different colleges and different departments to just spin up a new site. And as you may know, universities have very small development teams. And so it was in our interest to just kind of, oh, Lordy, okay, I'll make a new site. And so we just effectively pressed the equivalent of this create a new Plone site button. And we just do that. And then pretty soon we had containers running about 100 sites, 100 Plone sites. And I mean, that's really nice because really you're talking about Plone as a service. It's like a SaaS. Oh, we've got the infrastructure running. We've got the Plone instance and clients running. Let's just create a new Plone site. And it is that easy, but you can't get yourself into trouble. The voice of experience says that you're going to want to keep that number of Plone sites down per container, because otherwise you get locked in to exactly the software and exactly the versions of the software and exactly the same add-ons. It's hard to upgrade all of those sites at the same time. But that's a whole different story. But suffice it to say that don't go crazy with this. But if you were to go ahead and click on this create a new Plone site, you've already got one because I made one in the machine image. So once you could click on view your Plone site, and hopefully you'll all see this. Okay, I'm going to hit the back button because I want to show you what that create a new Plone site button does. If you create this if you want to create a new Plone site, you can just keep clicking this. Oh, yes, we have to log in. Does everybody know the password for this? Oh, sorry. That's the one thing I was trying to keep from the public. And let's see, it's 2020 PWC.
Hey, Kim, real quick, I'm not sure if you answered this already, but Hillary was asking if you can define a container for us.
Oh, container, sure. I'm about to show you. So okay, so 2020 PWC is the password. I'm just gonna put it in my clipboard here. But your username is admin, and your password is 2020 PWC. So once you've logged in, then you get to see this form. And so your path identifier, this is the ID, the unique ID of the Plone site that you're about to create. And the reason why it appends a 2 there is because you already have one called Plone. So it's just naturally going to append a number to the end of that. And then you can put a title for your site. And this is just going to be a throwaway site, so we're not going to do much with it. So I'll just leave it like that. And then your default language, which is set by your browser. And then your default time zone, which is also set by your computer. But you can see, you can put in a lot of different time zones there. So if you create a Plone site now, it's going to chug away for a little bit, and then you're going to be presented with that logged in view of your Plone site. There you go. So Hillary, to answer your question, what you can do is if you notice in your browser, in your web address bar, you're looking at the same IP address on port 8080 as before, but with the identifier of your Plone site appended in the path. So if you were to just delete that and then hit enter, you're taken back to your container. And as you can see here, you've got your first Plone site, which I'd created for you as part of the machine image. But now you've also got the second Plone site listed here. And it's called site here, unfortunately, because that, well, I mean, that's the title that you gave or did not give to your site when you created it. And you can just go crazy. You can keep adding more Plone sites. So that's how you can get yourself into trouble. The first one's free, and then, boy, you're in trouble. So there's a couple of other links here I did want to show you because let me go ahead and click on Management Interface. Some of you who've been longtime Zope people will know that it used to be referred to as the Zope Management Interface, and probably that's what Zope people still call it. But for a while in the Plone community, we were trying to hide the fact that we use Zope because it was so uncool, right, Hillary? But really, Zope is beautiful now. Look at this. This is this beautiful Bootstrap UI. It's been upgraded. I mean, it's shining, right? But this is really the innards of what's behind Plone. This is what powers a lot of Plone. And so you can see right here, these two sites that we created, they're just objects inside Zope. And if you want to go crazy and create lots of different sites, you can create folders to store these sites, to organize them a little bit. And you can, and this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but you can take each one of these folders and put it into a different database mount point, which means that you can restore, you can back them up individually per mount point and restore them per mount point. So what we did at the university is we had probably 10 sites per folder per mount point, which meant that if we ever had to restore from backup, we would only ever have to restore 10 sites at a time. So the collateral damage would be the 9 sites that were in that same folder as the site for which some administrator had gone and deleted something, which, you know, they should get punished for. But so that's a little bit of the view of the Zope management interface, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later. So I'm gonna, if you look here again at the URL bar, we're looking at manage main, but if you click view, you can get back to what we were looking at before. So let's take a look, excuse me, I can't mute this. Let's take a look at the original Plone site I created for you. So that's the first one here. I don't want to go over this super quickly for those of you who have never seen Plone before, but I just want to give some of the highlights. Once you're logged into a Plone site, you're going to see the clue here is this toolbar on the left. And that toolbar really lets you do a whole bunch of different things, like look at the content of a site at a particular folder you're in. And this is one of the key differences between Plone and other content management systems, is that Plone organizes content in folders and nested folders, like you would on a computer. And it didn't occur to me that other content management systems didn't do it that way, because as a computer guy, I just kind of naturally fell into, okay, you got a computer, you got a command line, you got folders for managing files and so on. Well, I guess Drupal and WordPress don't do it that way, but it is naturally done this way for Plone. And so if you click on the contents button, then you can see essentially what's like a file system directory of what's in your current folder, and you can navigate down to other subfolders, and there are buttons across the top here that let you cut, copy, delete, sort, filter your content. So this is really the way that you're going to want to do massive management of your content, moving folders and pages and things around on your site. It's using this contents button. But if you click back on view, then you're taken back to the original view of the thing that you were looking at, which, as you saw, we navigated down into the news folder. So that's what we're looking at here. And then you can see in your breadcrumbs where we are currently on the site. So I'm going to click back on home. So going down the list here, you can edit the thing that you're looking at currently. You can add new content items to the current folder you happen to be in. So this shows you all the different content types that Plone currently lets you add in this folder. And a content type, for those of you who are new to Plone, content type is really just a definition of the information that you want to store together. So in a regular page like this one, if we click edit, you can see what the content type for a page looks like. And so it's got a title, and this will be common to everything in Plone. You've got a summary, also commonly used for all content types in Plone. And the title and the summary are indexed by the Plone search engine so that you can automatically find anything based on words that appear in the title or the summary, but also in the text. So this is a rich text editor, the same tiny MCE editor that you'd see in I think WordPress and Drupal. And it's got your standard WYSIWYG functionality, toolbar icons for changing the formats of making headers and so on. But this is what your page content type looks like. So there's a few more tabs here for additional settings. So you can turn on table of contents for long pages. Versioning is something that we won't talk much about today, but really it's what allows you to trace back who made a change to the thing you're looking at and possibly revert back to it. You can assign keywords to any piece of content in Plone that you can then use to search for later on. That's a very important part of search in Plone. And then we'll talk a little bit more about this. This is the publication date and the expiry date for Plone content. This is part of the workflow. So the support for Plone workflow, which is, I was going to say in the box, but Plone, Plone comes with it out of the box. It's not an add-on. It's not an afterthought. And you'll see shortly why workflow is so important in Plone. So I'm going to press cancel. Ownership is not much to it. There's not much to it.
Hey, Kim. Yeah, sorry to butt in real quick. Could you enlarge your active screen real quick? Just that window.
Yeah, sorry.
You're good. Just a little bit hard to read. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I'm going to press cancel. So that's really what content types look like. But then let's say we were going to add, say, a news. What's a good one? No, I'll pick an event. So you'll see what I mean by differences in content types. So when we add an event, the event content type defines slightly different fields to store. So that's the structure of the information that represents an event. So we've got the standard title and summary, but now we have a start date and end date and time. There's a whole bunch of management details that you can provide about the dates when an event is going to take place, and so you can do recurrences if you like. But then you can see these additional fields about the location, like which room, for example, a thing might happen in. This is really more for information's sake if you wanted to list some names of people. Name, email, address, phone number. I'll go ahead and put in something here. It's always useful to put in something in the summary, not a whole paragraph, for example, but just something that can help someone else later on search for it. It is on from 12 today, well, 12 my time till 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, actually 3 o'clock my time. Well, we'll just leave it at 4. Phone number and text, and I could go. All right, I'm going to press save. So when you look at your event, you're seeing the same field values that we just entered, but displayed differently. And so a content type in Plone is the set of fields that you want to have someone enter values for. plus associate with it a way to display that content, that information. And for those of you who are familiar with Plone, there's different kinds of displays for different kinds of content types. So for example, if I look at the home again, there's a display menu that lets me choose how I want to present that information. So summary view will, instead of showing this front page, summary view will just show each item in that current folder with the summary listed below it. And you can do things like present a tabular view, less pretty. You can say all content. This is kind of a, sometimes it's quite useful. It'll present every piece of content one after the other, so it'll make your page really tall. This is useful if you're doing things like manuals and you want to present a manual, even though it's broken down into folders and pages inside folders and then subfolders and so on. You can present an entire manual from start to finish using this kind of display or a slight variation to it. At the university, we displayed the undergrad and the graduate bulletins using essentially this kind of view. Any questions so far? So what are the other things that you can see in this toolbar? On the bottom, at the bottom of the toolbar, if you click on your user ID, which because you logged in as the admin, you can see some preferences, which if you were, if you wanted to, you can specify a time zone, a language preference. If we had multiple kinds of WYSIWYG editors, you could select one here. I think this is quite rare nowadays. TinyMCE is generally very good, so there isn't as much call for different editors as before. And if you had a regular account, you could change your password too, but the admin account is a special one that comes with Zope, and therefore is just not, it's not, you can't change the password for it inside a Plone site within that Zope container. But you can provide things like your name and email address and a portrait if you like. Hey, I just see Alexander joined us. Hi. All right. So in addition to the preferences, then we'll take a look at the dashboard later. But site setup is something that we're gonna take a look at shortly. And log out, I think that's clear if you want to log out. This is one way to do it. But I wanted to show you the control panels. So if you chose site setup here in your personal menu, then you will see all the different configuration panels, the control panels for Plone. And this is kind of the danger zone. So again, thinking back on my experiences, not bitter or anything or traumatic at all, but at the university, when we had so many different departments and programs and clients essentially responsible for their own Plone sites, we started off giving people the access that you have now, which is giving them the equivalent of an admin user, which is a manager role in Plone. And it didn't take very long for us to realize that that was a bad idea. And so we started restricting very tightly who got manager access to their Plone site. And so one thing that please remember, be very selective about who you give manager access to. Anytime someone has access to one of these things, there's a good chance they're going to go in and change something, which is fine. I mean, that's the point. But if they don't know what they're doing, they can leave the site in a bit of a mess. Which actually, at some point, I hope to show you, if somebody can remind me, I want to show you how you can undo changes in the database. It's kind of neat. So this is all the different control panels, and we're going to use some of them later on. But the main one that we're going to take a look at is the add-ons. And if we click on add-ons, you'll see here, these are the add-ons that I've included in the machine image, but we haven't yet enabled them all. Please don't, not yet. You can get a lot of trouble because sometimes they don't work together well and they'll conflict. but we'll turn on a couple of these over the course of today. If you scroll down further, you can see things like if you had activated add-ons, they would be down here. But you know what? Let's go ahead and turn on, for those of you who are following, let's turn on impersonate. And we'll talk about that later, but we might as well just do it now. So I'm gonna press the install button next to it. And yep, so you can see here it's been installed. And then I'm going to go back to this list and install Easy Form, which we'll use to build some forms. And while I'm looking at this, Document Viewer is a tool that was originally built by Wildcard. And unfortunately, there's something I wasn't able to figure out on the machine image for turning it on. But what it does is it'll present you with a browser view directly into a PDF or a Word document, so you can just look at it right in your site, you know, inside your browser window without having to download it and open it up in another tool. But yeah, that's a good tool to install. It does require some additional dependencies, which I wasn't able to get running in time for today. The other add-on I wanted to point out is Lineage, which allows you to create a folder and then say that this folder is a subsite. So it'll look, for all intents and purposes, like its own site. And this is really useful if you've got a lot of different teams or a lot of departments in a university or an organization, and they kind of all want their own site, but you don't want to create multiple sites in the Zope container. You just create a folder in one Plone site and turn it into a subsite with the Lineage tool. Okay. Any questions?
With the Lineage tool, does that avoid some of the problems you were having with creating all of the different sites in the one container?
Yes, absolutely. I love it. Thanks for your questions. I've got so many stories to tell you. In fact, one of the things in my Twitter teaser video I promised to not talk about in that video was how I met Calvin. So as you know, Calvin is the CTO and co-founder of 6 Feet Up. And I met him in 2008. And so this great sidetrack here. I met him in 2008 at the Plone conference in Washington, DC. And leading up to that conference, it was my first conference. And I'd been in communication with a number of people about this tool that I'd heard was under development called Lineage. And it was this mythical tool that was going to allow us to create subsites without creating entire Plone sites. And it was really what we wanted at the university, because we were busy getting ourselves into trouble by creating all these additional Plone sites in Zope containers. And so the way I met Calvin is I'd seen him talk, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him until between presentations. I saw him rushing off to the bathroom. And so I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to run after him into the bathroom. So he goes in the bathroom, I run in after him. We're standing next to each other at the urinal, and I'm saying, hey, Calvin, I hear that you've got this Lineage tool. Where is it? Like, when can I have it? When can I use it? And he starts talking to me about it. And he says, well, I need to patch something. Someone needs to, you know, change something in Plone core or whatever. And then suddenly coming in the door is Martin Espelli, the guy who's supposed to be making this patch. So like the three of us are standing at the urinal talking about this Lineage add-on and going like, yeah, I've got this thing to do, and then I'll merge that thing, and then I'll patch this other thing. And then in comes through the door, Kurt Bendel, who is the guy at the University of Louisville, who is running, I think, about 400 Plone sites inside one Zope container. And he's the guy who put me in touch with Calvin. So the four of us are standing at the urinal talking about this add-on in 2008. And that's my story of how I met Calvin. And so, yes, there was no illegality involved. It's all about Lineage. So, and the irony, ultimately, is that we never actually used Lineage at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, because we'd figured out enough about how to use Zope containers and folders and mount points that we were able to get by. But Kurt Bendel definitely had something like 300 or 400 Plone sites in one container, and he was suffering from it. Okay. How are we doing for time? We're 1 hour in. All right, I should probably speed this up. Okay. Does everybody okay to keep going for a bit, and then we'll take a break, 5-minute break in about 10 minutes? Yeah? Okay. So let's talk about workflow. As I mentioned before, Plone workflow is something that's just baked into the product. It's been there since Zope, since before Zope was called Zope, when it was called, I think, Digital Creations. And so you'll see in some of the documentation still in some of the code, it's referred to as DC workflow from Digital Creations. And so the Zope people, including Paul Everett, were the originators of this concept. And it's been because it's been a Zope thing, it's been part of Plone since the very beginning. And it's one of the things that makes Plone so secure and predictable and useful in a large scale environment. And by large scale, I mean where you've got lots of editors and you've got lots of users of different access levels, because you want to prevent someone from, say, publishing content on your site that hasn't been reviewed by someone else. And that really is the main use case for Plone. It's referred to as a simple publication workflow. So what is a workflow? What does it consist of? Essentially, it consists of some states that a thing can go in. So it starts off private, and then once someone's finished editing it, they submit it for review, so it goes into a pending state. And in that pending state, no one can edit it anymore, because you want someone like an editor with reviewer role to come in and check it out, make sure things read correctly, there are no typos, and then that reviewer can publish it. And so that final state is the published state. So in a simple publication workflow, there are 3 states. And the transitions are the actions that allow an object to move from one state to the next. So let me show you an example. So I'm going to go back to home, and I'm going to change my display back to, this is kind of a quirk in Plone. So right now, as you recall, we were using the all content display. I'm going to change this back to selecting a content item as default view, which is a very wordy way of saying, what's the thing I want to have presented when I look at this folder? So I'm going to choose that, and there are only 2 things I can choose. I'm going to pick Welcome to Plone. So I'm press save. So now I'm looking at, again, the original front page. If you look at the state button in the toolbar, you can see the state of the current item, which is published. My choices here, these are the transitions I was talking about. I can transition this object back to, in this case, private. I can also retract it. It's a kind of curious thing, because both of them really do the same, but both are available because I'm actually, as an admin, and as you are, when you're an admin, you have permissions to do everything. There is no permission check when you're an admin. So send back is, as a reviewer, I would be able to send it back. It's a nicer way than to say reject. Or if I wanted to, then as an owner of the piece of content, because as the admin, I created this, I can retract it myself, which is a nicer way of saying it. So that's why you've got these 2 choices. So let's pick retract. Now we've got the item into the private state again. And from here, what are our choices? I could publish it directly because I'm an admin. I have manager role, so I could just go ahead and do it. There's no permission check. But as a regular user, I would only be able to submit it for publication. So those are, and let me go ahead and pick submit for publication. Now we're in the pending state. There's that second state I was telling you about. And from here, again, as a reviewer, I'm allowed to publish the thing because it looks good. I can edit the page further if I need to. I could send it back. I could say, nah, it's still no good. Or because I'm the owner in this case, I can retract it because I've decided, okay, this isn't up to par, up to snuff. I don't really want to publish it anymore. But that level of that workflow allows you that level of control over what becomes public on your site. And this is really important for any site that's open to the public. You want to, as an organization or as a team or as a company, you want to prevent the wrong kind of information from getting out there about your group. So workflow is a key part of Plone, and you can apply a workflow to different kinds of content types in your site. You can also, in this case, the default workflow for all content in a Plone site you can set, and that's the current one, the simple publication workflow. But you can also create custom workflows, and Plone itself ships with a bunch of different workflows, which we're going to take a look at shortly. So the key thing we talked about was the states and transitions, and then we do have some special cases for folders and images and files. So let me go to, I'm going to go ahead and publish this front page again. So let's use the contents tab, contents button. And you can see here there's an upload button. Let's use that. And I'm going to drag some images in. So let me just move this a little bit out of the way. I've got a couple of nice images here. I'm going to drag this one in. And then I'm going to press upload. I could drag in another one too. Let's do that. So I've got two. I'm going to press upload. You can see them uploading. I'm going to click here to hide the upload target. So you can see the two images I uploaded. I'm going to show you here. I'm going to add a column that shows the, actually I didn't need to. I wanted to show you the review state. This is the workflow state of an object. Clearly here, there's a state assigned to the workflow, the welcome to Plone page. It's published. These two items are private, but these images have no workflow state. And so that's one quirk about simple publication workflow, that it's not assigned to files and images. And there's a reason for that. I won't get into a lot of detail, but essentially it's to make it possible for people to just easily upload images and files and link to them from other content without having broken links because something was left private, which happens a lot. In the case of a tool called Castle CMS, which is based on Plone, that workflow decision was changed back so that files and images have their own workflow applied to them, so that it's a more secure, it's a slightly more secure variation of the workflow. But you can change these things, and we're going to take a look a little bit later how you could do that. So files and images, so files would be Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, and things like that. And images are basically the same. They're binary data, except there's a little thumbnail. So you can view a thing too. You can view an image like this. All right, shall we take a couple minutes break, 5 minutes break? All right, let's come back in, I've got 207, 205, 202, so let's come back at 207. All right, see you in a bit. Oh, I was enjoying the music.
Sorry, I saw you got back, so I
Oh,
didn't want
thanks,
to
Josh.
take your time.
There's when we were doing a couple of dry runs yesterday, we had, for some reason, I guess Calvin had put some kind of creepy music on a loop, and it was just creeping me out. Oh, this is so much nicer.
The music for the slideshow. Yeah.
Holy moly. I hope that's not on today, is it?
I don't think so. I think Calvin changed the music after some feedback. Yep. So I stopped your screen share. So definitely just feel free to grab that back.
Okay. Yep. Before I keep going, is there anything like I'm only on slide 10. I'll probably be speeding up a little bit just because there's a lot. I wanted to make sure that you all had at least an introduction to these concepts, so that when we talk about how we turn Plone into an intranet, you understand why, the underpinnings of it, and that way, it'll be easier for you to understand what you might need to change if you want to have slightly different behavior in your intranet. So let's take a look at some of the details of what a workflow contains. So to do that, I'm going to click on admin and go to site setup again. And here's where I'm going to scroll down a little bit to the management interface. So this should look a little familiar now. If you look at the web address bar, you can see we're at the original server IP address :8080, and then the site ID for Plone in this case, and then this /manage_main, will become very familiar to you as you start to use Plone more. That's really the management interface. And so we're looking at it inside the Plone site. This is the innards of Plone, and you're going to want to stay out of this, except for a couple of things. Please don't do what a lot of people well, maybe not a lot, but a small but significant minority of people will go through and start deleting things out here and then call up the help desk and go, why is my site not working anymore? Please don't do that. So a nice thing about the new Zope 4 user interface is you can type in here and you can just get down to the thing you're searching for. So in this case, portal workflow. I'm going to click on that. And you can see different types of the different content types in your site and the name of the workflow assigned to it. And the one here, you're going to see the default workflow is this one, simple publication workflow. So that's just a quick, not a very pretty view of, there's actually a nicer view in a Plone control panel that shows you this, but this is what that front page is for portal workflow. But the thing that's most interesting here is contents. Any questions? No? No? Okay. So what you're going to look at here is this list of all the workflows that are included in your Plone site. And as I mentioned before, you can add more workflows. You can clone some of them. So if you were to check this one, you can say, copy it and then paste it again. So you can make variations of your workflows. And it's a very, very nice tool for slightly altering the behavior that you've seen that's, you know, mostly what you wanted, but except for in this one particular case. So it's easy to go in and select these things and start tweaking them a little bit. I recommend that you always clone a workflow and adjust the clone rather than change an existing one, because it could very well be that someone's relying on the behavior of that particular workflow. And if you just go ahead and change it on them, it could lead to unintended consequences. So let's take a look on, you don't need to check this box. I'm going to click on Simple Publication Workflow. And what you're going to see here is a set of tabs across the top. So you got the title, you got the description, but the tabs across the top will tell you, for example, let's click on states. And this will tell you the 3 states that are part of this workflow. So as we said originally, private is the default state. That's why there's an asterisk next to it. And from the private state, here are the transitions that are possible. So if you've got the reviewer role, you can publish. But if you're just a regular person, a member, then you can just submit. And from the published state, for example, as the owner, you can retract. And as an editor or someone with reviewer role, then you can reject it. So that's a quick glance of the states and the transitions available. If you click on transitions, you'll get to see a little bit more detail for each of the transitions. So in the case of submit, so this is when, if you'll recall, when someone creates a piece of content, it starts in the private state. From the private state, a person, the owner, can submit it for review, and these details tell you, say, what the destination state should be for this transition. So it would go from private to pending. It's a user action as opposed to an automatic one. So there's the concept of automatic transitions where there's an attempt by the code to initiate a transition under certain conditions. And then what kind of permission is required before a person can even see this transition in their menu. And then this is the name of what that transition appears with in that menu, in that state menu that we were looking at in the black toolbar. Let's take a look at, for a given state here, I'm going to go back to states here. I'm going to look at published. So I'm going to click on published. Now we're looking just at the information about the published state. This is how you can specify which transitions are possible from this state, so outbound transitions. And then if you look at permissions in this tab at the top, you can see here all of the special cases for the different roles in your site. So these are roles, these are defined roles that you can group permissions. So if you can imagine permissions, there's a lot of different permissions, and we'll take a quick look at how many permissions there are on a Plone site. A role allows you to say, shorthand, this particular role should have all of these permissions, and then you can assign a role to an individual or to a group. And it's a very powerful way of controlling and organizing the very fine-grained security of Plone in a way that's manageable for a large number of users, a large number of permissions, and a large number of roles. Otherwise, you get into, I don't know, I imagine that Cisco firewalls are like this, where there's hundreds or thousands of things and you need to get a special certificate in order to manage it. Plone doesn't have to be like that. So what you're seeing here is, in the published state, the anonymous role, that is people who are not logged into your site, can access the contents information and they can view the thing. So when you publish a piece of content on a Plone site, these checkboxes being set are what allow the public to see the thing. If you were to uncheck these and hit save, and then publish the next piece of content on a Plone site, without these two boxes being checked, the anonymous role, the public will not be able to see the thing. So it's a very direct way of controlling the permissions on a thing during its transition between different states. And you can see other roles here, like editor and manager and owner and the site administrator. Those roles, anybody who has those roles or anybody who is in a group for which those roles have been assigned can modify that piece of content. That's the special permission name for modifying content. So that's just a quick glance at how you can control who can do what to a piece of content that happens to be in this particular state. Any questions? Okay. So let's go back to, so that's the, oh yeah, the security tab. So let me go back to simple publication workflow in the breadcrumbs here. And
Hey Kim, another quick question from the chat. Elizabeth asked, could you remove your own access as a site admin?
Let me think. You could. In this case, so we're logged in now as the admin user, which is a special case user that has manager role. I guess you could check that box, and then you'd wonder why you did it.
The reason I ask is I work in Zope, and we had someone who got a little too power hungry and removed all access of the view and then locked us out completely.
Ah.
So I was wondering if that still was something you could do in Plone.
It is, because as you can see, I mean, we're looking here at the innards behind Plone. This is the Zope control. So yeah, you can cause damage here that would prevent you from using the Plone UI to undo. So what you would have to do is probably, if you could, you'd have to undo the transactions out of the database if you could catch it in time. But yeah.
Kim?
Yeah.
May I add there something?
Yeah, please.
So actually, it is possible that the site admins could remove themselves the rights for site admins in a Plone portal, but they could not remove a Zope manager from accessing and modifying a Plone site inside. So
Yeah,
there's no possibility of that.
So not inside Zope. Okay. Yeah, the other thing I was going to suggest is you could maybe create an emergency user. So there's a file system script that you can run to create an additional user. But I think, I mean, it'd be an interesting thought experiment. Okay, but thanks for the question. So let's take a look at some of the other workflows. I don't want to get into too much detail here, but if we go back to portal workflow and contents, you can see these other workflows in here. And some of the differences between them are very fine. There's an old Plone community workflow, this one, this Plone workflow here, which is what Plone used to ship with when it was intended to build, it was intended to run the plone.org site. And so it was meant to be a very freewheeling community site where you essentially trusted everybody to just do the right thing. And so you didn't need to submit any piece of content before someone else could view it. In other words, when you created a piece of content, you could just make it visible to other people inside your community and they would just see it. You didn't have to have that control over someone could specifically or would specifically have to publish the thing for it to be visible. And so as you can imagine, that only works when you've got a relatively small or trusted set of members of a community. But that is something that if you're running a club, for example, you could definitely switch that to be your default workflow for your Plone site. And the ones that we're actually going to use today are the ones called intranet workflow. It's a slightly different one that applies to folders, but the intranet extranet workflow is the one that we're going to switch our site to very shortly. Okay. So let's take a moment and create some users. So what I'm going to do is in the breadcrumbs here, I'm going to click back on the Plone ID and then click View. So I'm back in the Plone site. And then in the preferences, in the personal menu down at the bottom, I'm going to click Site Setup. And I'm going to see down here, there's users. I'm going to click on users and groups. And what I want to do here is this is the control panel that lets you create groups and users and assign which users should be part of which group. And so let's start off by creating a couple of groups first. So I'm going to click on groups here and I'm going to add new group. And I'm going to call it Team 1. You can put in the title there as well. And I'm just going to hit save. I'm going to add another group, Team 2. Press save. What's the other one? Oh yes, external group. I'm going to create an external group. Save. All right, so you can see down here, those groups got added. So Team 1, Team 2, external group. And this control panel is useful for assigning roles, which we were seeing before in the workflow. You can assign these roles to entire groups. Now, I would not recommend that you do this because any changes you make in this control panel will affect the entirety of the site. In other words, if I were to say that Team 1 should be given editor role and I press save, anybody who's in Team 1 will be able to edit anything on the site. That's probably not what you want. And I kind of wish we would somebody would make a pull request to put that warning right here, because at the university we got into so much trouble because people would do this and then they go, I made this folder that's private over here, but this person can edit the thing. Why is that? And then you go look here because they had a bunch of checkboxes checked. So don't use this for this. Don't do this. Don't do this. All right. So then we've got these groups made and we're going to add some users. I'm going to make staff user 1, staff user 2. So let's go back to the users tab. And I'm going to click add new user. And I'm just going to go staff user 1. And here you can put in any email address you want. Username, I'm going to make the same password. I would normally, when I create users in a Plone site, I do leave this box checked. And what that means is you don't actually have to specify a password. You leave these two fields blank and you let the system send out an email to the person and they check, they click the link and they set their own password. That's a lot cleaner usually. But in larger institutions, you're generally going to have connected your Plone site to a central authentication system like LDAP or Active Directory or OAuth or something like that. So I usually, in this case, let's uncheck that. And I'm going to add that user that I'm creating to Team 1. So I'm going to check this box. This is a nice way of just doing it all from this one page. All
Hey,
right. So
Cam,
now,
before we get too far ahead, I did miss a question here.
yeah.
Will reviewer roles receive notice when an item is set to a pending review state?
Very good. Um, not by default, but you can create what's called content rules in Plone that will alert somebody when something happens. And you can set all sorts of conditions to check for. And if all those conditions are met, then an action can be taken. In one case, it's sending an email. Another case, it's showing something on someone's web page. Or we'll talk about this a little bit later. You can set up collections, which are essentially database queries that find content that match certain criteria and display them to a person. So that's a good question. And it's actually something that I've customized a lot on different sites to make it easier for someone to get notified when something needs their attention. Because yeah, if you're responsible for a lot of different pieces of content to review, it's easy for them to get lost in the mix.
Real cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so let me just add a couple more users here. I'm gonna add staff user 2. Uncheck that. I'm gonna add them to team 2. And then we're gonna have supervisor. Actually, you don't need to create all of these, but I want to show you for sure how you could use these things. But oops, oh, nice validator. And that'll be team 1. I think we'll stop there. Okay. The idea is to have a couple of users that we can use to test our security settings later. Okay, so we're looking at this Plone site right now. I'm going to click back on home. And so we've got the toolbar on the left. We've got a couple of things that have appeared here in the top nav that are just because Plone is set to display anything in that navigation bar that you happen to have created in the home folder, the top folder of the Plone site, but you can change those settings. But let's take a look at this. We're going to mimic being the public, the unwashed masses. So what I do is I generally, well, I'll copy the web address to my clipboard, and then Firefox lets me do this new private window thing, and I think Chrome calls it incognito, and Safari calls it private browsing. So I'm going to create a new private browsing window, and I'm going to paste that URL in. Okay, so we're looking at the same site, but clearly we're not logged in. So the things that we saw in the original window here that were red, we definitely don't want to have them visible to the public. And so they're not, and there's no toolbar, right? Okay, so that's pretty basic. But we're going to want to do a variation on this because we're going to want to make this site generally maybe public for certain published pages, but we're going to want to make other portions of it private so that you require login, and so that you actually require login by specific individuals or specific groups to see a piece of content on the site. So that's just, I wanted to set that up for you because often people don't know that testing of security access is really important, because you can make assumptions about what you've done, but if you don't actually test, you don't have that confidence. And sometimes you're dealing with information that's fairly confidential. It might be HR information, it might be student reviews of professors, and you really don't want that information getting out there to the wrong individuals. So you can use a different browser entirely. So I'm using Firefox. I could open up a Chrome window or a Safari window or another like Brave window, but you can also use this incognito or private browsing tool. And then in Firefox, there's the containers, Firefox containers. So you can set groups of tabs that should be logged in as different users. So that's getting a little bit complicated. But if you're a Firefox fan, I'd encourage you to look at containers. So let's take a look at being logged in as staff user 1. Right. And what we can do here is we can log in with this private browsing window. And I'm gonna log in as staff user 1, same password. What do we see that's different here? So obviously we're logged in, we have the toolbar, but we don't have edit access on any, certainly not on this part of the on the front page, or news or events, or even the images that we've uploaded. So we can only view them. We can copy to the clipboard. We might be, but we won't be able to paste. So this is first level of logging in. This is what's the equivalent of being a member on the site. Someone has an account on the site, and so they can log in, but you still are able to control what they can do. The other way that you can check to see how a person sees or interacts with your Plone site is to use the Impersonate add-on, which we installed just a bit earlier. So back on this original browser where I'm logged in as admin, down in the bottom, if I click on my personal menu, I have this Impersonate choice. So this is a tool that I would recommend that you as site owners consider installing on your site. Let's click on that. What you get is a list of the users on your site, and it's kind of a clunky UI. I know there's an issue filed by me to make this an autocomplete type in kind of thing, but yeah, I've so far been lazy. I haven't implemented it, but if one of you wants to do it, it'd be wonderful. So what you can do is you can copy and paste the user ID in here, click Impersonate, and I'll go ahead and do that. And what you get now is this looks exactly like the other browser window. So if I flip between them, sorry, I'll go back to home here. It's identical because we are logged in as staff user 1, right? So what the Impersonate add-on does is it totally mimics your being that person. It in fact behaves, it makes Plone behave exactly like if you were that person. This is really useful if you want to diagnose any security configuration that you've made on your site. So if you're trying to figure out, can somebody in fact not see that thing that they claim they can't, or is it just some sort of user error? You can use the Impersonate add-on, and so it's a very useful tool. However, it's obviously not a tool you want to give to everybody because you are actually that user. So in an audit trail, if I were to edit something or delete something, it would appear that staff user 1 did it, even though I was just impersonating that person. So it's something to keep in mind if your organization gets a little leery of somebody being able to do that. It can get hairy. So the only way to not mimic a person, not impersonate a person, is to log out entirely. So I'm going to log back in here as admin, and then it's 2020 PwC. Oops. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let me try again. Sorry. I'm back there. Okay. So let's make this entire site an intranet. And this is what you've been waiting now an hour and a half for. We're going to the control panel. So site setup. And then we're going to scroll down a little bit to, sorry, it's right here, content settings. Okay. And when we are looking at the content settings control panel, there isn't much here initially because this is a drop-down menu. And this is saying that the default workflow for your site is simple publication workflow, which we're looking at the details of. But if we want to, we can just change it here. So in the new workflow, drop this down and pick intranet, extranet workflow. When you choose that, you're going to be shown a mapping. And this is going to allow you to control a little bit more finely what should happen to pieces of content that are in the old workflow state and what the equivalent state they should be moved to once you've changed over, once you change them over to the new workflow. So in this case, they really match up. Pending should be pending, private should be private. Published, we want to be safe, and we're going to convert anything that's published to what's called internal draft state. So what are the other states available in the intranet extranet workflow? We have private, as we saw, we have pending, we have internally published as well. So that would be visible and highlighted in navigation to logged in users. And we also have externally visible, which is the public, anonymous role can see the thing. So generally speaking, if you've got an intranet where you essentially don't want to allow anybody from the outside to see anything, don't ever use externally visible. Okay. So we're going to leave this mapping the way it was set. So anything that's published will go to internal draft. And now you can press save. So you do get a warning. If you've got a site with a lot of content, it's going to have to re-index all of that content and change its workflow state, and then recalculate, as you saw, that mapping of permissions and roles to reapply security to every single piece of content that's affected. So it can take a while. So this, I'm going to hit save. I think I already hit save. Okay. Now, if you look at your navigation bar here, you can see some things have changed a little bit. Color hints are useful for us if we don't have visual impairments, but as you know, Plone's accessibility story is excellent. So all of these will be hinted at in a kind of label so that screen readers will tell someone who's visually impaired what the state is. But news, which was published before, is now in the internally published state. So that's that yellowish mustard kind of kid poop color. But then everything else really should look pretty much the same. So you've got the state here for the formerly published front page is now internal draft. So back in your other window, your private browsing window, press reload. And let's see what happens. So now we see, yes, the front page is internal draft, and these things are visible as internal draft as well. We still can't edit, and we still can't do pretty much anything else. In another window, let me open up another private browsing window. Oop. Is this going to work? No, sorry, private window. I'm going to log in. I'm going to view it again. Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, so let me close that. I was hoping that I could use that. I'm going to log out. So I've logged out. I'm no longer staff user 1. If I try to click on home, I get this login page. So this is the protection that the new workflow has placed by making the front page internally an internal draft. It requires you to log in to see it. So really, this is the easiest way to make your Plone site an intranet, is to change the default workflow for your entire site to intranet extranet workflow. At this point, the only things that will be visible are things that have no workflow assigned to them. If you'll recall, images and files in Plone's default simple publication workflow don't have their own workflow state. They take their workflow state from the container that they're sitting in. So in this case, the folder, the top level folder of Plone is published, and that's why these things are visible. So you can change that. There's a couple of strategies you could use. You could make a subfolder called images, move them into there, and keep that images folder either private or internal draft, internally visible. Any questions? All right. Let's go back to our login page, sorry, our logged in page, and let's create a few folders. So again, if you're looking at the front of your site, click add new. Let's add a couple of folders. Call one public. So here's a trick. I'm going to hit the back button. So I'm back to the add folder, and I'm going to call another one intranet. Hit save. I'm going to hit the back button again. Call it teams. And clients. Okay. So back on the Teams folder, so this is what we're doing here. I'm going to click on the Teams folder, and I'm going to add a folder for Team 1. And use the back button, Team 2. Okay, this will make a lot more sense later, but what I'm doing is I'm setting up some folder structures, and we're going to change the security on each of them so we can compare what happens. And so one of the things that we've naturally had at the university and other clients is that within an intranet folder where we make sure that we keep things organized in that folder that we definitely do not want to make public. It's a little bit clearer when somebody encounters that folder and they go, okay, this is my intranet, as opposed to the rest of the site. Now, there are sites that are, as I said before, are completely intranet, completely protected by requiring login for anything in it. But just in case you want a mix of externally visible and internal only content, this is probably the clearest way to manage it. So within your Teams folder, sorry, I think, did I miss a step here? Teams should have been inside the intranet. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what can you do for a specific folder? In a particular folder, so I'm going to create, this is the concept of workflow policies means that you can actually say that a folder and anything inside it can have a specific workflow applied to it. So not only can you change the workflow for your entire site, you can say that this folder or in this folder have different workflows that apply to them. So this is the level of fine-grained control that you can apply to the content in your site. This is how you can really tune the access that you want for different parts of your intranet. So to do that, let's first install an add-on called, I'm sorry, I should have done this before, an add-on called Workflow Policy Support. Okay, so that's installed. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the intranet folder, which I can click it here, intranet. And then here, we are going to use the state button. And you can see now there's a new choice called policy. So I'm going to click policy, and I'm going to specify a new policy for this folder. You can see now that the policy just has the default policy, which is whatever the default workflow is for your site. And you can apply it on the folder itself, as well as below this folder. So anything contained in the folder. So again, even finer grain control, you can change what's in this folder, but have a different policy for anything inside it. We're going to go and choose intranet for both. And then we're going to press save. Okay, so now let's take a look at the transitions and states possible on the folder. So if we're back to viewing, when I press state, I can make it private, but that's it. So if you recall, before you had states for private, internal draft, internally visible, internally published, and externally published. And so again, you can say that on a particular folder, you can further restrict what sort of transitions are possible. Let's add a piece of content here, like a page. I'm just going to hit enter so I don't. Now on this page that we're looking at, what are the choices? Now we're back to what's available in terms of the intranet, extranet workflow. So folders have different workflow and compared to non-folders. As you recall, there was an intranet workflow for folders and a separate intranet workflow for other content items. So again, here you can do things very specific to an item versus the folder versus the things inside it. And the best way to do this is to just test how this behaves with a private browsing window. So back over in here, I'm going to log in again, staff user 1. Because I'm logged in, I can see that there's an intranet. So I can click on it. I can see Kim's page. I still can't do anything here. And I still can't do anything here, but it's visible to me because I'm logged in, which is the point really mostly of your intranet. Any questions? Okay. When we're looking at, I'm going to flip back to this browser window. When we're looking at the Teams page, Teams folder, it's outside the intranet folder. And let's say we want to enable a workflow policy for it. We could click on the Teams folder and apply a policy here. Or if you wanted to, probably easier is to move the Teams folder inside the intranet folder where it already has a policy. So again, using Plone's ability to manage content through folders is probably the most powerful way of keeping your security simple and manageable. So what I'm going to do is actions cut, navigate to the intranet folder, and then actions paste. So now the Teams folder is inside the intranet folder, and it has the same workflow policy applied. I'm not going to do anything with the clients folder at this point, but the idea again is to just keep things organized so external people can log in and you can grant specific permissions on the clients folder so that you can keep things isolated from the parts of the intranet that are only for your internal staff. There's a lab, a water quality lab at the university here that had an intranet extranet because they would receive requests for water samples. And what they wanted to do is allow their clients to see their lab results by logging into their website. So this is how they did it. They had a separate clients folder. They would move the content directly into there that their clients could log into and see. There's a couple of other ways of granting access to folders that are in some ways maybe more direct. So you can use the sharing tab, the sharing button, and you can specifically grant access. You can change who has access directly on that folder. So as opposed to using a workflow policy. And so the way to do it is, so for example, we're going to take the Team 1 folder, we're going to click through on it. And if you look at this button here, the sharing button in the toolbar, you can see it should seem familiar to you. The idea is that each of these columns represents a role, and they have slightly different terminology here, but someone can view, they can also review, that's the reviewer role, so someone can publish or a piece of content, editor role, and this is contributor role, so somebody can add something to this folder. And right now, the only pseudo group that you can see is logged in users. That's just someone who's got member role. But you can look up other groups like Team 1. When you hit search, you see Team 1 appear. And here we're going to say Team 1 can add and edit and view. And press save. What's this recently was changed so that you could click through on Team 1 and this will show you who's in Team 1. So it shows you the group membership of Team 1. That's a nice addition. And hit back. So what happens now is someone who's in Team 1 should be able to add a new item to this folder. They should be able to edit anything in this folder, and they should be able to view anything in this folder. So back over in my private browsing window, I'm still logged in as staff user 1. I'm going to go to the Teams folder and team 1. Now I can add new. All right. So this is different because before I used the sharing button, no one could add anything to that particular folder. But now that I have said that anyone who's a member of team 1 can add, view, and edit content in this folder. So again, you've got very, very specific control over who can do what in a specific part of your intranet. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Some of the differences between internally published and externally visible. I wanted to show you very quickly how this looks. So you don't have to follow along, but I'm going to go back to site setup. Scroll down to management interface. Going to start typing workflow. There we go. Contents. So when we look at the intranet workflow and we look at the states, I'm going to open up a new browser tab for internally published and external. And then in each of those tabs, I want to show you what the permissions look like. So that's the one for internal. This is the one for internally published. And this is the one for externally visible. So what are the differences between them? I'm just going to flip between the tabs. So this is a quick way of getting a sense for what you're doing by transitioning a piece of content to a particular state. So here, when something's externally visible, you clearly want anonymous users to see it. But that is not the case for these other two states, right? So that makes sense. Once something is in, say, the internal draft state, this set of permissions is slightly different from these ones. And if you could see that, I'll flip back between them. The difference is, once something is internally published, editor and owner can no longer modify it, right? So I just wanted to give you a sense for how you can tell what's the difference between this state and this state, and why you might want to leave things in a particular state as opposed to allowing your editors to transition things. All right. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Quick question. Going back to the impersonate, is there a way to back out of that without logging off?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just looking that up because I was going like, surely there's a way to avoid having to log out entirely. Well, one of the tools that I mentioned before that's based on Plone, it's called Castle CMS. That was a tool that was created by Wildcard, where I used to work. And what we did is we incorporated the functionality of impersonate directly into Castle itself. And what you would see when you use the equivalent of impersonate in Castle is you would see a little bar across the bottom of your browser window that would say you're currently viewing the site as so-and-so. And then if you click the little X to close it, then it would revert you back to the original user you were logged in as. And that's slightly nicer UI for that feature. It's something that probably, if somebody took the time to re-implement it, to backport it into Plone, we would all benefit from it. But so far, people have been happy using it the way it has been. But it's not a widely used add-on just because it's kind of dangerous and you want to make sure you limit who has access to it.
Okay. One other thing, a colleague of mine has a question on Slack.
Sure. Do you want to tell me what it is?
Let me see here, 1 second. will the reviewer roles receive notice when an item set to pending review state if a group email is sent?
Okay, well, that. I think, I don't know if he's the same person who asked before, your coworker is the same, but let me
Oh,
show you
okay.
how that works. No, it's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, that's good. Okay, let me flip back here. So I'm going to go back to the Plone site. And press view and go back to site setup. And this is a useful question. I mean, all these questions are great. There's these things called rules, and I'm trying to find it. Where is it? Here, content rules. So I'm going to click on it, and you can add a content rule that says notify reviewers. And so the triggering event here is that, say, an item was, or its workflow state was changed. And then I'm going to press save. Now we can specify any other conditions we want. So we could limit it by content type or which state. So I'm going to say which state the thing got moved into. I'm going to click add, and I could say pending. And then what should the action be? And I might want to send an email. So here you've got the ability to control what the body of the message will look like, what the subject line will look like, who the recipients will be, and you can substitute variable values directly in here with this little syntax. I guess this is Jinja. So you can say that this particular thing with this URL, sorry, I can't type. And then you would have to specify the email address here directly. So it won't look up directly the email address of the user. You would have to put the email address in here. Now there are older add-ons that would do a kind of language where it would substitute values if you specified them in here. I can't remember the name of that templating tool, but that's the built-in Plone functionality for sending out emails. And so it's a way to notify somebody by email when something happens.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Kim.
Yeah.
Got another question here. So, question for the impersonate feature. Is there any type of logging done when a user goes to the impersonate feature to basically show that admin user used impersonate for user account, test user 1, for example?
That's a really good question. I don't believe that there's any logging done in Plone for the impersonate user. It's possible that the code would do something like include a line, like an info log line to the Plone log, so the instance log or the Zio client log. That's probably not hard to add, and that probably would be a good idea to put that in. But as far as I know, I haven't seen any UI elements that indicate an audit trail of who might have used it. Going back again to what Castle CMS does, Castle CMS is sort of like the whole kitchen sink. It does a whole bunch of things, but one of the things it does include is an audit trail. I don't know if impersonation is one of the things that's included in the audit trail. I don't know, Raphael, if you recall, but other things are like someone logged in, somebody logged out, somebody deleted this thing, somebody moved that thing. Those kinds of things are in there, but not the default, the Plone impersonate feature.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I wanted to show you what using forms is like in Plone. So earlier we had, I'm going to click back on home. Earlier we'd installed the Easy Form add-on. And so when you do that, you get a choice here of Easy Form when you want to add a new piece of content. So let's pick that. And I'm going to just give it a name. So a form is really, I think you know this. This is a way of presenting like a lunch order. And you can set some of these things. Mostly you can leave these alone. You can put in a little bit of rich text at the top. and press save. So right now, the default easy form is just a simple, essentially a contact form, which not really useful because Plone already comes with one. But you can start off with this form, and then by using actions, you can define additional form fields. So this lets you build a nice form that if you grant someone can add role in the sharing tab in a folder, they can go ahead and create these forms. They don't need any additional special permissions. So I'm not going to spend too much time at this, but I wanted you to see that you can build new forms very easily. So here I could say main course. And so here you can leave your choice of field type as a text line, but you could also do choices. You could do multiple choices. We can leave it like that. You can indicate whether a field is required. And now it's down here, and then I can drag that up into place. Oops. All right, there we go. So in some of them, you could choose to hide the subject line, or you could delete it entirely. Each one of these fields has a settings link, so you can specify additional details about the field. You can provide validators, so if you're, say, asking for a phone number, you could check that it's actually a US or international phone number. So there's a whole bunch of configuration you can do when you're building these forms. I'm not going to set anything here, but if we view the form, I'm going to click back on launch order here. This is what the form now looks like. Red dots indicate here that the field is required. But then you can also define actions. So these would be things like, what would you like to have happen with the information that's submitted in the form? And the default action is to send an email to someone. And by default, that email will go to the email address that you specified in your site configuration. So the owner of the site will get this form submission. And you can be very detailed about how you send that email, who should receive it, who should receive a copy, and so on, even down to what should the message look like. You can even customize what the subject line of the message should be. There's a whole, again, a whole bunch of configuration we don't have time to spend on today. But in addition to the mailer, you can add a new action for saving data. And the action type down here is save data. And if you go ahead and add this save data adapter, every time somebody submits that form, they will get that data stored in the save data adapter, which you can then export as CSV, for example. And you can grant that access to the exported data to other individuals in your team. So you don't have to grant them edit access on the form. You can just give them download the exported data permission. So that's, and then the other kind of action that I wanted to show you is the custom script. And that lets you write a little bit of Python code that can do certain things based on the information that was submitted. So you can actually make a custom script that will do something like, in addition to sending an email, which you do with the mailer adapter, and saving the data that you'd use with the save data adapter, you can have a script do something else inside the Plone site. So a piece of content might, for example, get transitioned as a result of a submission based on values that were submitted in the form. So you get a lot of control over what you can do with just a basic form. And it's actually a very powerful tool. All right. Any questions about Easy Form? I wanted to make sure that you saw it because this is something that everyone asks for in an intranet. It's like, can I make forms? Yes, you can. Here's how. I want to cover just a little bit more before we take another 5-minute break. But in Plone, we talked about the different content types that you can create out of the box with Plone. So all of these add new choices, you can make your own content types with Plone. And that's it's a tool called Dexterity. That's the name of the framework that Plone has given to the content types. And so to create those content types, you go to your site setup, and you can look at Dexterity content types here. And this shows you all the content types that your Plone site is aware of. You can check a box next to, actually I'm going to take the event. I'm going to clone it. This is usually the easiest way to make a new content type, is just to copy an existing one. And I'm going to call this a conference. Okay. So now we have the conference content type down here. I'm going to click on it. Yeah, press apply to save that. Okay, now if I look at the fields, this should look a little familiar to you. This is the same UI as the easy form, but you can add new fields. So this right now is just a copy of the event's content type, but I can add something like cost. Make this a number field. Okay, that's a silly example, but you can see it got added way down. Oop, where did it get added? Here, it got added here. So the standard title, summary, those are usually part of any Plone content type, and then this field got added, and then all the other fields that were cloned from the event. Now, before I switched away from here, I wanted to show you that the Behaviors tab lets you check boxes next to groups of fields and associated behavior that makes sense to implement, to turn on or off for your content type. So you can see all the ones that are enabled, but you can also do things like enable additional ones or disable ones that you don't want. Lead image lets a person specify a little photo that will catch someone's eye when they're looking at the thing. So I'll check lead image, and I'll scroll down and press save. So now go back to the home. If I press add new, I can add a conference. And actually this doesn't actually make sense, but okay, I'll put $100 and I'll set the date. Probably start on the Wednesday, and then I want to end on the Friday, you know, that kind of thing. So it looks like a conference, like an event, but because we've customized it by adding new fields, you've got a very fast way of designing your own content types in your intranet. And this I've found is actually something, in addition to regular forms, is still a feature that's called for by a lot of users, because they want to be able to customize their intranet to allow, say, for expense reports. And just submitting the expense report information through an easy form isn't sufficient, because they want to be able to track that this expense report that was submitted has its own workflow that I can then say it goes to the accounting department first for verification, and it goes to an HR department, or it goes to the department chair for approval. So you can make these content types custom for your intranet and your users, and apply a custom workflow that lets you electronically move them through an approval process. And then in the end, in this case, ultimately end up in payment happening. So someone can go and search through their intranet for all their expense reports, and they can find where they are in the state of the whole process. Any questions? Shall we take just a 5-minute break and then I'll get through the rest of here? Is there, if any of you have any specific things that you were looking for answers to, or you had any questions that had come up, please let me know. So we'll come back in 5 minutes.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay, thank you.
I'm alone in the dark, can I be where you are? You were gone from the start, now you tear me apart. I gave you my trust, but you treated me like I couldn't see. I thought you were the one, but I know that I'll never be the girl that you need. You need. You would feel the same if you were at the back of her mind. Suddenly the rain wiped away the dust from my eyes. I'm alone in the dark, can I be where you are? You were gone from the start, now you tear me apart. I gave you my trust, but you treated me like I couldn't see. I thought you were the one, but I know that I'll never be the girl that you need. You need. You would feel the same if you were at the back of her mind. Suddenly the rain wiped away the dust from my eyes. I'm alone in the dark, can I be where you are? You were gone from the start, now you tear me apart. I gave you my trust, but you treated me like I couldn't see. I thought you were the one, but I know that I'll never be the girl that you need. You need. You feel the same if you were at the back of her mind. Suddenly the rain wiped away the dust from my eyes.
You're the life of the party, I guess. You crave all that attention. Where is everyone when it all ends? Always seems to be the question. I know you like to show it off. It's okay if it's fine, but it's not good you think, oh no, I walk away, but I ain't losing. Oh no, I'm tired of people trying to fool me. 'Cause I learned the price of love. Don't give away anymore that easily. I just wanna level up. 'Cause I'm stronger than I was, not the strongest that I can be. Cause I'm stronger than I was, not the strongest that I can be. Here you are, you got so much to say. They want me to pay attention, but never ask me if I wanna stay. Word after word, I feel the.
All
Thanks,
right,
Josh.
and welcome back. Kim, you actually did get a question here while you were in the restroom. So Michelle asks, you mentioned earlier that there's some add-ons conflict. Is there a way to know which ones will conflict? If not, is there some documentation or anything like that?
That's a very good question. The way that the add-ons conflict isn't necessarily that they break anything inside Plone, but what happens is you can have an add-on that makes assumptions about what will appear in the UI, and they'll make a change to that UI to fit what they want to implement. But then another add-on might depend on something else being still visible, and so when that add-on gets added, then it changes something else. So unfortunately, there are so many different add-ons that you can put into a site and ways that you can configure them that it's hard to know ahead of time without just trying it. And that, in fact, is the reason why when Wildcard created Castle CMS, one of the reasons behind that was to avoid some of that conflict and sort of finding out that, oh, these two items, we want to use them together, but they're kind of, their UI paradigm, for example, doesn't match. So that was the reason behind the development of Castle CMS, which was to take Plone and put in all the add-ons that they knew their clients wanted, which their main client is the FBI, and to make sure that the add-ons worked in a consistent way, the UI worked in a consistent way, and things were tied together more in a way that was predictable by users, so you didn't need to use a manual for anything. So that's really why the whole story about how do add-ons all combine to work together, that's how Castle was, that's how Wildcard decided to solve the problem, which is to package all the add-ons together and then clean up the UI. So, so that's, unfortunately, this is the thing about Plone, that the use cases for Plone are so varied, and all the different combinations of add-ons that people add are so varied that it's almost down to, well, it's your special case, let's work on it together and figure out what breaks, what doesn't. But generally speaking, you're going to want to not do what a lot of early Plone site administrators do, which is put everything in their build out and then start turning on add-ons, because then you find out that in some cases you can't uninstall the add-ons cleanly. So you try to uninstall it, but there's no uninstall button, or they leave little cruft behind that make it hard for you to migrate your site up to a new version of Plone. So it's over the years, you get more cautious about how you add add-ons to your installation.
Awesome, awesome. Well, again, I stopped your share so I can put music on. There you go. You already got it. You're way ahead of me.
Yep. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Great. Okay. So thank you for bearing with me, and I hope this is still interesting to you. There's just a couple more slides I wanted to go through. We've talked about workflow applications, which are custom content types that you can apply custom workflow to. So we saw very quickly the idea that you can take a workflow, clone it, and then make adjustments to it, add states, add transitions. You can apply those custom workflows to your own content types. So as we were looking at Dexterity to create a custom content type. So that's really the basis for what we refer to as workflow applications, and they're really so powerful, and they save a lot of time and money. At the university in Oshkosh here, there was one workflow application we built for study abroad students that they estimated saved about, I'd say, excuse me, half a staff person's salary per year, and that's conservatively, and they've been running it for 12 years. And so they just got hooked on adding more and more workflows. And you can imagine universities are so cash strapped anyway. It's a nice way for them to maintain a level of productivity that they just couldn't otherwise. So let's take a look just quickly at some search features. So Plone's, one of the reasons why I got hooked on Plone was that there was a search engine built right into it. And so if I put in things like in the search field at the top here, if I type in a thing like Python, there's, look at this, autocomplete, immediate search results. You can just click through on the thing. Well, obviously the Welcome to Plone page mentions Python, but so does that event that I created, or that conference I created. So search, okay, so is that really that new these days? No, probably not, because most content management systems have search built into them. But let me show you a couple of more tricks. If I go ahead and click on the search button with nothing in the search field, I can see a list of all of the items on my site that are visible to me. So search is security aware. In Plone, you cannot see something even if you search for it and it exists. If you're not authorized to see it based on the workflow, the state, who you are, what roles you have, what roles your group has been assigned to, or all the groups you're assigned to, all of that security computation goes down to deciding what gets shown here. So your search is security aware. You don't have to worry that just because you have search enabled on your site that someone's going to see something they're not supposed to. That is not going to happen with Plone. So now you can see this one's private. You can see the color hints, but you can do things like search for things, search results in different sort orders. But there used to be, unfortunately, oh yes, here it is. The filter search results lets you say which kind of content types you want to see. So you can further refine what you want to see. So if I don't want to see any conferences or these, I just want to see pages that contain the word Python, and that's my search results limited. Now the trick is, if you look at this URL here, you can copy that and you can reuse it. So your search query is reusable if you just create links to that. So it's a nice way of shortcutting what somebody might search for. You can turn on RSS search feeds for search results. And so that's just touching on some of the ways that you can search for things in your intranet. If you've got content, if you've got keywords assigned to content pieces, search will also look for those keywords. So one of the things that you can do with search is reuse the results, but you probably don't want to just copy and paste these hard-coded URLs in your site. What you can do is you make use of a tool called collections. So Plone collections are essentially these search results, but displayed much more nicely. So I'm going to go to the home. I'm going to add a collection, and I'm going to call it Python content and search for. So my search terms here let me specify what I want to look for. So I want to find anything that includes in searchable text. That's a special index that Plone maintains. That includes the title, the summary, and any body of a page or an event or a news item. And I'm going to say I want it to find anything that matches the string Python. Now searchable text is case insensitive, so you can go ahead and just use lowercase p. And then you can specify additional search criteria. So if I wanted to just look for pages that contain the word Python, then here is where I could type in my criterion for page type. And if I want to change the sort order, I could say I want to show the most recently modified things in reverse order. So that's at the top is the most recently modified. I can do limits. I can put in some text to describe what people are looking at. I'm going to press save. So now the only result on the site is welcome to Plone, because that's the only page I had there. But if I were to add a new page, I'm going to go back to home, add a new page. Oops. Press save. So if I'm going to look back to my home, where'd my collection go? I'm going to use contents. Sorry, it's right here. So you can see now the same collection returned a new page than this other page, the most recently modified one at the top. So you can use collections to redisplay content on your site, on your intranet, in different ways that meet the needs of the different audiences you have for your intranet. So if you've got professors who are looking for certain kinds of content, you can build collections that show only content that you think is relevant to professors. It might be different for staff, might be different for supervisors. So you can put together collections that display very easily without your having to change any code. You just build them once and you put them in different parts of your intranet. So if you have an intranet folder that's for faculty versus staff versus students, you can put different collections right in there and make it easy for them to find content that's directly relevant to their needs. So again, the idea is you want to target your intranet's information to the specific audiences and keep driving them back, because hopefully they find your intranet to be useful. And that's one very nice way of making content relevant to a particular person.
Hey, Kim, got another question for you.
Yeah.
So is there any easy way to manipulate the rich text or the body text before we send it to the searchable text for indexing?
Is there an easy way to manipulate searchable text before we send it?
Manipulate the body text or the rich text before we send it to the searchable text for indexing.
The searchable text index just looks at whatever's in the piece of content. So anytime you edit some content in your site, if you change the title or the summary or what's in the body and you press save, the indexers will go through that piece of content and update all the indexes that are maintained based on the different fields that you've got, that you've changed values for. So anytime you touch the title, summary, or the body, it will update its own, it will update the searchable text index with information from the title, the summary, and the body. So there's nothing that you can do directly, but you can create your own indexes and you can create custom indexes that do different things for different kinds of content. So I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you can index new fields in your custom content types. You could say that anything that is a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on, day of the week maps to a number, and your index can store a number. So you can do a lot of things, but you have to get into the innards of Plone. You have to code some Python to make that happen. I don't know if that answers your question. There is actually, we do have a little bit of time. Let me show you what that looks like in terms of the catalog. So I'm going back to site setup, and in the management interface, I'm going to look for catalog. And I don't know why Firefox eats that first character, but if you look at portal catalog and you look at the indexes tab, these are all the indexes that Plone maintains by default. And you can add more indexes here to do more specific things, but you can get yourself into trouble because every time you add an index, there's additional processing that Plone will do whenever you make a change to some content or you add content to your site, because the catalog will go and update all of the indexes that apply. So you can end up spending a lot of time computing or updating the indexes. If we click on one of these, you can see description. Okay, this is a text index, so you're not going to be able to browse it. But there are other ones like, oh, what's an ID? Oh, portal type. Here we go. So, excuse me. If you look here at this Browse tab, you can see these are the values. The first column shows you the values, which in this case is the portal type. And here are all links to the pieces of content that were indexed to have those particular index values. So an index like this, as you can imagine, every time you make changes to content, and if you got more indexes in your site and you've got a site with hundreds of thousands of pieces of code of content, you can spend a lot of time computing and updating the indexes. All right. So some of the other ways that you can reuse content on a Plone site, there are these things called portlets, which are little bits of information that you can place on the page. I'm going back to the Plone site. And anywhere you've got this toolbar, you should be able to see this Manage Portlets button. I'm going to use All. And this lets you control what appears in the left column and the right column. And Plone portlets inherit from the top, so any containers will inherit those portlets, so from the parents, but you can block them. So right now we're looking at the Welcome to Plone page, and that's what this message is trying to tell you. And so you are looking at parent portlets for events and news. So if you had any upcoming events or published news items, they would be showing up in the right column. If you've got, some of you have already seen, you may have noticed the navigation portlet in the left column. So all of those you can control by, you can block if you don't want to see them, but you can add portlets. So I'm going to add a portlet here called a collection portlet. And I'm going to say Python code, Python. And then the target collection I want is this Python content. And I won't limit the number of results, and I'm press save. So now you can see I added my Python portlet. This is a collection portlet, and I'm going to press return. So now I see this new portlet showing me the results of this collection. Is this useful generally? It can be, because again, going back to the philosophy of making your intranet useful to your users, you want to present them with information that's relevant to them. And so you can imagine that if we go to a Teams folder and we want to show the team members who look at that folder additional content that's relevant to them, showing a collection portlet over on the right-hand side of the page, for example, is a nice way of highlighting what they need to be aware of. And this, going back to a couple of questions that we've had, can reviewers be shown which set of items they need to review so that they can be published? This is a nice way of adding that too, because you can show what's called a review list portlet in the right column or the left column. Another place you can put it is in the footer of a page too. And because these inherit all the way down, you can set them at the folder level, and anything that's contained further down in that folder will still normally show those portlets. So again, you've got a lot of control over being able to simplify how you deploy this reusable information, but you can still manage it easily. I won't go into detail here, but you can create content type portlets. So if you've got, say, like the conference content type that I created that I can't see now, but you can make portlets appear on specific content types. So if there's a page content type, you always want to show some kind of instruction to someone on how to use, well, maybe not a page is a good example, but like a conference. So we have a client who's been using custom content types that we created with the lineage subsites feature. And we have conference organizers who want to create conferences and manage attendees and presenters and so on. We can have a portlet appear just for conferences and show instructions on how to use a feature, for example. So depending on what someone's looking at, you can control additional information that appears. So that's what a content type portlet is useful for. So we're getting a little bit closer to the end here, and what I want to show you is another place that you can use portlets. Oh, I skipped a little bit here. Sorry, let me just go back here. So another place you can use portlets is for groups. I did want to show you this. Let's go back to the groups control panel. I'm going to click groups, and here's team 1. Now, if I'm looking at the members of team 1, but if you look up here, there's group portlets and group dashboard. I'm going to look at group portlets right now. So here I can say, if you're logged into your site and you're a member of this group, I want you to see the following portlet. So in this case, I'm just going to do something like static text portlet. And that's just a way of putting some rich text, anything that you want, arbitrary. So team 1 members, remember to wear your badge. And I'm going to press save. So now I have a team 1 members portlet. Going back to my other browser where I was logged in as staff user 1, I'm going to reload this page. And now you can see my group portlet appeared here. So this is, again, another way of fine-grained control over presenting information that's relevant to your users, whether they're an individual or in this case, a group member. You can provide new portlets, other portlets that are always relevant to that team, that group. And it's a very powerful tool that isn't widely used, and it's unfortunate. There's so many things in Plone that are useful this way. And this is one reason why I was so happy to have the opportunity to show you some of these. So that's group portlets. And then now I want to make sure that you see the dashboard. Any questions so far? Okay, we're going to the bitter end. Thank you for staying with me. Okay, so back in the admin browser window, if you recall, I glossed over this. I talked about, I mentioned the dashboard link, but I didn't use it much yet. And so if you click on your dashboard, and every user gets a dashboard, initially it's blank. So we're looking at the dashboard tab, but I can edit my dashboard. And here I'm going to be able to add portlets. Again, this is why portlets are useful here to present to you, because they just keep showing up in different parts of the Plone UI. So if I want to add a portlet, I can just pick one here. I can say I'm going to add a calendar portlet. And this is actually a little bit smarter than what you'd normally consider to be a calendar portlet. Used to be a calendar portlet was just, okay, show me the current month and the date, the day of the current, well, the current date would be highlighted. This actually lets you do a query to do a smarter display of what appears highlighted in your calendar view. I'm not going to use it right now. I'm just going to press save. So now I've added a calendar portlet. I'm going to add a collection portlet again. This one, I'm going to keep using my Python content portlet. Okay, hit save. I'm going to say review list. This is useful. This is what will display whether or not there's any information that's been submitted for review. There's not much to configure there. So now I've got these 3 portlets. I'm going to press dashboard. So now I'm looking at the view of my dashboard. So I've got my calendar widget, my calendar portlet, the current date highlighted. I've got the Python content collection showing, and right now I don't have anything showing in my review list. So let me go back to my other browser window, and in the team 1 folder, I'm going to add a page. I'm just going to hit enter. So I created a page called For Your Review. I'm going to submit it for publication. And now you can see the color hint has changed and it's showing that it's pending review. I'm going to go back to my other browser window. I'm going to reload this page. And now my review list shows the new item that was submitted for review. So if you think about the possibilities here, there's a lot of information you can put and present in front of each person that's customized for their use. You can have each person create their own dashboard if you want, but you can also create group dashboards. So again, going back to the user panel, the groups control panel, you can add elements that will show up on a person's dashboard depending on the groups that they're a member of. So it gets really powerful really quickly. So this is why portlets and collections become key elements, key building blocks for you to build these dashboards. And what we found is these kinds of dashboards are extremely useful. People, I believe there's a setting in Plone, I can't remember now if I'm confused, but there's a setting that will take you to your dashboard the moment you log in the first time. And so if you use that feature, then once a person logs into their intranet, they immediately have in front of them the kinds of hints to the elements that they need to visit or make use of on their intranet. Any questions? Okay. So hopefully a few of you went through and created that server from the Amazon machine image. I gave you a quick tour, hopefully not too boring, of all the features of Plone that you can use. They're just normal content management for Plone, but because of all the security that Plone has and all the features for workflow control and sharing permissions and group memberships, you can turn into an intranet very easily. I showed you some of the things that you can use for creating custom content types and custom workflows, adding forms, mimicking being somebody else. And then we talked about some of the strategies for comparing security settings with different browsers, which is something which oddly enough has been something that people didn't commonly clue into using. So it's a nice tip, hopefully, for some of you who start embarking on a Plone journey like this. Just be aware that if the information in your intranet is something that you want to definitely keep private, it's worth testing fairly consistently anytime you make a change to the workflow or the sharing permissions on folders or items. So I don't want to spend too much time on production deployment, but if you are looking for deployments of real intranets or Plone sites, one of the reasons why I deliberately chose to use Amazon AWS here is because it's really the big 800-pound gorilla in the room, probably heavier than that even. And there are so many tools that you can use for deploying Plone ZIO clients and databases, especially for large-scale production sites. You might want to look into not using standard ZIODB, but using rel storage and say a Postgres database in the back end. And so with Amazon RDS, you can do a lot of things with replication and failover. So there's a lot of ways that you can configure a very complex Amazon deployment, especially if you've got an organization that spans multiple regions, whether it's in the US or elsewhere. So you've got international users spread out and they can get faster performance based on a good deployment of the Plone stack. So for next steps, if you have any questions, obviously, I hope it's obvious. I'm very happy, we're all very happy to answer your questions or field any inquiries about how to use Plone or how to set up an intranet. A lot of us at 6 Feet Up have a lot of experience building intranets and hopefully a lot of Plone sites, but there are a lot of resources that are available to you for free. So definitely start by looking at plone.com and plone.org, and there's documentation, there's self-paced Plone training. I do want to mention that in particular, the training is something that the various trainers in the Plone community, and I've given some trainings before, we always update the documentation, the training manuals, so that at the Plone conferences that we have annually, the training is free. It's included in the conference admission, which is not very expensive, but you also, as someone who may not be able to get to the conference, or you may need to refer to some of the manuals at off times, you can always look at those annually updated training manuals at training.plone.org. There's also an additional Plone-based tool called Quave, which uses Plone but has its own UI on top. It's called Quave. It's a social intranet, so it's not quite Plone-ish. It's got kind of a Twitter-ish stream or a chat stream and a whole bunch of built-in tools that are custom for them, but it's widely used for some pretty large intranets. And I've heard that the Star Alliance, the airline group, uses it, and there's a whole bunch of other big clients. I think Porsche uses it, so a lot of Europeans use it, but that's based on Plone too.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, are there any questions here for Kim at all?
Yeah. Sorry, is there a link to the slide deck there?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'll make that available. I'll put that into the track in the Slack.
In the Slack, okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool.
And do you have any recommendations about if I wanted to set up a personal site using AWS and just have a real lightweight data storage, but one that, you know,
Didn't cost a lot?
Wouldn't cost a lot, and that I could potentially take the data and move it someplace else if I didn't want to use AWS anymore. Is there any information that you know of about that, or should I just start Googling?
I can definitely. I've actually built a couple of sites using Amazon Light Sale, and that a light sale can cost as little as $5 a month.
That's my price range.
Yeah, I know. And actually, those other providers that do something similar. I think Amazon just kind of like it copies other good ideas. Linode.com is another one that I've used a lot for like 12 years or more. DigitalOcean is another one. But yeah, they've all got this $5 a month price point, which is awesome, because for $5 a month, you can run you can run a sizable Plone site. As long as you don't get hit with a lot of traffic at the same time, it's definitely doable.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
And then one stupid little question about the Plone site we were working on here. When I added a collection to mine at the root, it didn't show up in the navigation at the top, and I thought that was supposed to show everything. I didn't touch the navigation settings, so I thought it was supposed to show everything that was at the root.
You're absolutely right. Thanks for asking, because if I can get so what you want to do is you can go to site setup, and then it's navigation, I think. Where to go? And here you can see the kinds of content types to show in the navigation. Yeah, so thanks, Hillary, because I was going like, yeah, why is my collection not showing up there? It's because of that. In fact, you probably don't want all of these things to show up. So folders are fine, images, links, not news items, and maybe not pages. So that's probably the safer set of things to check. Yeah, you can see, I mean, you can even get finickier. You can even say, I only want things that are in a particular state to show up in the nav. Yeah, if you do that, thanks. Yeah, because I was going like, what am I doing here? I'm blind. But yeah. There's to your question, Hillary. I have a son who's 16 years old who's doing a robotics team in town, and one of the sites I made for them was I'm proud to say this is a Plone 5.2 on Python 3 site, and it's running on a $5 a month Linode. Yeah, so it's there's a theme that, as many of you know, there aren't a lot of free themes available for Plone, just because of the weird nature of how its organizations and corporations that brand Plone. They don't want to share their themes. So it's hard to find themes that are ready-made. So this one was one created by a Google Summer of Code student a couple of years ago. And it's available. I mean, if you go to plone.org/download, you can see a link to this theme, but it's nice, it's functional, and it's clean, and you know, it's mobile. Yeah, this $5 a month Linode. I've done tons of sites on Linode. Unfortunately for volunteer organizations that don't pay very much, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
In this case, the reason why the organization was immediately willing and happy to jump onto Plone, because they had a proprietary CMS that they were paying for that had a whole bunch of things included in the service, but they would never give access to a student to edit any content on the site because they were afraid that the student would also delete things and muck about and change things that were approved. And so when I said, oh yeah, you have to log in, and then, you know, you get this kind of permission if you're this kind of person, and they go, what? You got different permission levels? We're on. So that's how I was going like, what? I didn't even have to do a sales job. They just did it. So they were very happy.
So Cam actually has a question here. So do you think themes will be more readily available with the switch to React?
Ah, that's a good question. I don't know. A very close friend of mine is Victor Fernandez Alba, who is the technical lead for Volto. And he's been beating on me for years about how easy Volto theming is. And so if you were to look at plone.com, for example, one of the things we know we want to do in the Plone community is re-implement plone.com just to bring it up to date from Plone 4.3 to 5.2 or possibly 6. And Victor has been adamant, you have to do it in Volto. And there is a training class that he created to convince me that Volto was easy to theme. So, okay, let me just share my screen back again, sorry. So if you go to training.plone.org, oops, sorry, typo. Actually, it was right there. Volto hands-on. This theming class, it shows you how to start with Volto, how to set up Plone in the back end through, and then enable the REST API, and then create a, I can't remember the exact name for it, but you can start a Volto project, a React project that talks through port 3000 to the Plone backend through that REST API. And then it walks you through how to theme, how to create your standard Volto theme, how to customize it to make it look like plone.com. So plone.com, oops, come on, I have a new keyboard. Plone.com looks pretty slick. I mean, well, maybe it's a little old now. It's been out for about 5 years, but if you look at the standard Volto, this is their URL. Yeah, this is a Volto site. So if you click around on it, it's pretty fast to respond. I think yeah, admin. So once you're in there, you've got, anyway, I encourage you to play with this, but you can make this standard Volto site look pretty quickly like plone.com. It doesn't have all the dynamic content coming through, but it shows you in a half a day, really, how to get the start of a site themed to look like whatever it is that you're interested in making it look like. So I expect that even if it's still the case that organizations that use Plone tend to be corporations or groups that have their own themes, that they don't want to just reuse other themes, it will probably be a lot easier to develop new Volto themes once this starts rolling out.
Super cool. You have any more questions at all? Let me go look here in the Slack real quick. I see anything. Well, Kim, thank you so much for presenting. As everybody, round of applause.
Thank you. Please. No, thank you for your interest and for your questions. And I do look forward to, I'll be hanging around. you'll probably find me irritating, cracking jokes at some of these people I know. Not Hillary, though. I won't pick on Hillary. Actually, Hillary knows my son. He made balloon things for my sons when he was here at the symposium a few years ago. But yeah, but I'll be around. What's that?
It's been a while. I don't know that I'd say I know him, but I've encountered him, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Acquainted each other. That's
Yep.
awesome. I believe there's also a Plone channel in the workspace if you want to go join that. I'm sure that there's a lot of Plone folks here who'd be happy to answer your question. I know Chrissy was holding herself back, trying not to answer every single question that came through. Try to steal
great.
Kim's thunder.
Yeah, Plone is like Hotel California. You can check in, but you can't check out.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you very much.